today's video, I'll be focusing on the Western harp, specifically on how the harp went from this to this. Let's go back in time to medieval Europe. So way back when in medieval Europe, you had bards. Bards were traveling poet musicians. They were primarily found in Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and they played a much smaller version of the harp. And often they would be singing along with their harp. Their role wasn't just to entertain the people, but also to deliver news, and in a way be like the historians, telling tales and sharing epic stories. So if a bard were to sing a story about someone, that person was going to become famous. And if that bard was going to mock someone in one of their songs, that someone was going to be made fun of for the rest of their lives. So this kind of harp was around for a long time, and later we enter into the Baroque era, and then the Classical era, and then the Romantic era. It's during this time that we see some new innovations to the harp. Older versions of the harp had very small range, and as music began to grow more complicated and be written down, the harp couldn't keep up with this demand of more notes. And so these harp luthiers were trying so hard to just figure out how to tackle this beast called chromaticism. And because of this, we get two kinds of harps. We get the double harp and the triple strung harp. The double harp had 2 rows of strings down the soundboard. I'll be honest, I haven't heard much about this. Yeah, this harp existed. And from my understanding, the more popular harp was actually the triple strung harp. So the triple strung harp, like the name, had 3 rows of strings rather than 2. The 2 outer rows were the diatonic notes, or the white keys. The inner row was where you found the chromatic notes, or the black keys. This harp is still played today. And although it's not as commonly played, there are many people out there who still play it. This triple strung harp, or the Welsh harp, was taught orally. Music that was played on here would pass down from teacher to student simply by using their ears. Because it was a smaller instrument, the soundboard was smaller, and the way the string tension was a little looser, you couldn't get as big a sound as you would hear in a modern day concert grand pedal harp. But it was still a huge deal because you now had access to way more notes than before. So this was a really neat way on how they were tackling this chromaticism. During this time, we get the famous Handel harp concerto. At the time, it actually wasn't much of a concerto we see now. It was actually a small piece that was a part of a bigger piece. It was a part of a performance called Alexander's Feast. The Handel harp concerto was just a section of that. There's some debate. Some people say that it was originally written for the organ, but then also adapted in a way to be played on the harp. Some say that it was written originally for the harp, but it can also be played on the organ. I'm no historian. I'm still getting my bachelor's degree. I don't know if the original instrument was harp or organ, but it was one of the two, but it doesn't matter. We play it on the harp nowadays. So in Germany, 1660 comes up with this idea of changing the string tension by using a lever system and essentially changing the note by a half step. And this was amazing. It is still used today in the modern lever harp and in the modern Celtic harp. It stuck around because it works and it's awesome. So shout out to all the lever harpists out there. It is around this time that we get the single action pedal harp, invented by Jacob Hochbrucker around 1720. So he was German and he invented this system of pedals that allowed the harpist to change multiple strings at a time. So there was pedals and rods and little turning pegs. So the rods actually went through the soundboards, and so the soundboards were kind of big and clunky. So nowadays pedal harps, the rods go through the column of the harp. This pedal system was revolutionary, as before, in order to move things by a half step, you would have to be moving all these different levers. But now with your foot just moving one pedal, you can change every single one. So with this instruments, we have famous classical composers. They started to write for this new instrument, and this is where we get the famous Mozart flute and harp concerto. Mozart wrote this for the Duke and his daughter. He was an exceptional flute player, and then his daughter was a harp player. So the Duke basically commissioned Mozart to write this for him and his daughter. The single action pedal harp is great, but it still had its limitations. So for example, if you tuned your entire harp to C major with your pedals up, if you move your pedals down that one step, then you can only have access to all the sharp keys. You weren't able to have the full range. Again, these luthiers were like, how can we make it even better? And this is where things get kind of fun. Somewhere among this booming of new harps being invented, you get the 14 pedal harp. And it's exactly as the name sounds. There are literally 14 pedals. Basically, there's 2 pedals per note. One pedal would turn the C flat to a C natural, and the other pedal would turn the C natural to a C sharp. It was so complicated. It was insanely heavy because 14 rods made it so heavy.
I like 'em big. I like 'em chunky.
obvious reasons, this kind of harp wasn't very popular, and it probably just is chilling in some rich person's private collection. And in 1808, we get Sebastian Erard. He patented this fork or fourchette system, and it basically set the standard on how we make our pedal harps today. And along with his fourchette system, we end up getting the double action pedal harp, which basically solved the issue that the single action pedal harp had with the double movement or 3 different notches. Each string is now capable of having a flat, a natural, and a sharp, allowing it to basically have the full range of chromaticism. Chromaticism still was difficult on the harp because there's a lot of technique involved, but the harp itself was now capable of it. There are some rumors that before Sebastian Erard created this double action pedal harp, that there have been previous luthiers that have actually made it before him. I don't have much information on that, but if you are interested in that, please do more research. Sebastian Erard was the one who patented it, so he kind of owns the title of I made this. And we're now entering into the late romantic era. And so with the early versions of this pedal harp, you get famous harpists like Parish Alvarez. He started writing amazing stuff for the harp. And it is around this time that we start to see the harp kind of appear as a more soloistic instrument. So Parish Alvarez, he deserves a video all on his own. But really simply put, Parish Alvarez created some methods for the double action pedal harp, and he is credited for creating techniques that we use on the double action pedal harp today, like the chordal glissandos or enharmonic effects. Those are kind of credited to Parish Alvarez. So he did so much on just kind of kickstarting this new instrument and making it kind of popular. After him, we start getting other famous harpists. Alphonse Hosselmans, he was in charge of the harp studio at the Paris Conservatory. The Paris Conservatory was super influential on the modern day pedal harp. And he also wrote method books, and he trained many of the future leading harpists like Henriette Renier, Carlos Salcedo, and many more. So kind of backtracking a little bit, we have the double action pedal harp. Alongside the double action pedal harp at the Paris Conservatory, there was also another kind of harp that was called the cross-strung harp, invented by Gustave Leon, who worked under Pleyel. They make this harp and the strings that are crossed, and it allowed the player to have access to the entire chromatic scale without having to use their pedals to create the chromatics. And there's a bit of competition going on with these 2 different chromatic harps that were like the peak of solving this issue of chromaticism. Was the double action pedal harp more convenient, or was the cross-strung harp more convenient? And this is where we get the famous Debussy dances. Debussy was commissioned to write this concerto for the cross-strung harp. And when it first was ever performed, it was actually not liked. The public hated it. They were like, Debussy, this is trash. Sadly, that was not a very great start to this cross-strung harp's life. Slowly over time, the cross-strung harp lost popularity while the double action pedal harp kept gaining popularity. Around the same time, Ravel wrote the famous Introduction and Allegro. I always kind of wonder if Debussy's dances were more enjoyed by the public. Would this cross-strung harp be more popular? I don't know. But Debussy's dances did not fade into the oblivion. Pedal harpists actually kind of adopted that piece into our now standard repertoire. Pedal harp just kept growing and growing, and so with the now modern soundboards, the string tension is a lot stronger, allowing for the harpist to get a bigger sound. So that is basically the fun little overview of how the harp went from this to this. And thanks so much for watching. I hope you learned something. And if there's any part of harp history that you would like to learn more about, comment down below. If you want to see more harpy content, please subscribe and check out my other videos, and I'll see you in the next video. Fun fact, Tournier, his wife, Renée Lenars Tournier, also professor at the conservatory, he taught the cross-strung harp. So they're both just like harp professors, just playing different kinds of harps.